that wisdom includes balance in the emotions. It's not that there are some emotions that are good and that there are some emotions that are bad, but it is the idea that balance in emotions is key. And what we'll see here in a little bit is that anger without a balancing emotion of, say, compassion or love then gets out of balance. So it's one thing to see something and be upset by it. It's another thing to be upset by something and it's not balanced with love and compassion. Then all of a sudden your anger takes a route that is not godly. And so with our emotions, it's not that one is right and one is wrong, that there are often balancing emotions that we need. So Jesus saw these people were going crazy in Jerusalem, and so on the one hand, as Lord, he knows everything, so he knows all the sin they have, but then on the other hand, he has great compassion on them because they're like sheep without a shepherd. And so there are balancing emotions that keep us well in conducting one's life. Right. Okay. The idea is that any extreme in emotion is typically where you get most of your damage, right? In relationships, in business, in career, in family, any of that stuff. The extremes of emotions tend to be where damage lies, right? So we're going to talk about some emotional things with the brain and some of that kind of stuff. There was some research done, and the way that they conducted the research was they gave everyone like a beeper, and the beeper would go off at random times. And so they had a notebook, and they were supposed to record their emotion in the moment that it beeped, right? And so one of the things that they learned, and that is kind of somewhat common sense, is that everyone has a feeling all the time, right? So you're never without some emotional state, right? And so then they were tracking people's emotional states at different times. We tend to think of emotion or an emotional state as being the extreme. She was emotional. She flew off the handle, right? She was emotional. But the idea is that at any given time, you have a current emotional state, even if it's peace or if it's anxiety or if it's focus, whatever your emotional state is, you have a constant state of some form of emotion. They don't just come and go. The extremes come and go, but the constant state of emotion is something that we all live with. And so what they found is that most people do not necessarily feel like they're extreme, right? If you were to ask on the average, most of these people doing their beeper, most of what they reported was not an extreme emotional state. And so we tend to sometimes when we look at other people, we define them by the extreme emotions that we see. Oh, that person's a hothead, or something like that. We define them by the couple of moments that we see of extreme emotion. But most people, like our own selves, are not that extreme that you see. That extreme is part of it. But if you were to take the average of someone, typically what they find is in about a 2-week span when these people were doing their recording, if you took the averages of those emotional experiences over about 2 weeks, you tend to get their general feeling of well-being. That sometimes we have a lower sense of well-being in a given season or a higher sense. And it's not really the extremes. It's often what we do in the middle that has an even greater effect on our emotional state. So some of this research I think is pretty neat here. One thing that they found that I think is interesting is that if we live with a constant emotional state, right, then that means that the majority of our decisions are involved in creating a specific emotional state. That much of our decisions are centered around creating specific emotional states, right? So, you ever thought to yourself, man, I need to go out and do something? Or man, I'm ready for a vacation. I need a trip. right? I mean, did you not need a trip the week before? Or did you not need, you understand what I'm saying? That most decisions that we make in terms of our external things that we do are connected with some emotional state that we're trying to balance, right? That we have a preferred emotional environment, and many of our decisions, whether we realize it or not, are reflections of trying to attain a preferred emotional state. People that read a lot, that is a preferred emotional state. It's peaceful, it's relaxing, they gravitate towards that. And you will see that in other things in their life too, that they gravitate towards things that are more relaxing. Some people, their preferred emotional state is more excited, and so they're looking for thrills and adventure. And every weekend they get, they're trying to jump out of a plane, or they're trying to, tempt fate in some way, and which I enjoy some of that stuff too. But so the idea is that there are specific emotional states, and many of our decisions we don't even realize it. We say, "Man, I feel like I need to go do something tonight. Let's go out and let's go eat," or something like that. And you don't even realize what you're actually doing is you're saying, "I need an adjustment in my emotional state right now," and so we make a decision to do something in our surroundings that we think will adjust our internal emotional state. So it's kind of interesting to go back in and think in our own life how much of our decision making, we think we're just doing it randomly, but often it's not. It's a specific emotional decision that the emotional part of our brain is creating that then affects how we spend our free time. It affects how we spend our money. It affects how often we travel. It affects what kinds of things we do, because internally we have a preferred emotional kind of balance that we're after. And when we feel ourselves getting away from that, we have identified certain activities that can bring us, we think, closer back to our balanced state, right? So it's kind of interesting to think about what motivates us.
Do any of those emotional, I mean, obviously it's more to what you are, but is it any indicator as to where you will be, what your heading is, or what your personality, or, I mean, I see myself as, I like the quiet, peaceful, sit down with a book thing, but I think that my brother's wife, she'd never,
Right.
she always has to be doing something.
Right.
She gets finished one thing, she says, okay, now what can we do? And I'm like, we're going to go sit down
Yeah.
and get a book. What do you mean, what are we going to do?
Yeah. And that pulls her out of her preferred. So I think this is often it's something that we can't even hardly put words to. You know, we'll say things like, "Well, I like reading." You know what I'm saying? We don't even. But what it really is I enjoy that emotional place. It's peaceful. It's relaxing. I will do things that I do that whenever I go on vacation. I will replicate that while I'm on vacation. You probably do the same thing. That how you the emotional state that you enjoy when you're at home does not change when you go on vacation. So you may travel, but you'll bring the books with you, and you'll have, and so there are things that we do. It affects how our relationships are. Have you ever said to yourself, "Man, I can't be around that person right now"? You've made an emotional decision that being around them is going to change my emotional state, and so we say things like, "Man, I can't be around them right now." Or sometimes when we're down, there are particular people that we say, "I need to call them," right? Because we associate emotional states then with other people as well. And so many of our decisions are centered on trying to fix an imbalance that we perceive in our own emotional state with external stimuli, external relationships, those types of things. And we often have a hard time even putting a name on it. Well, that's just what I like to do, is what we'll often say. But really what's at the heart of that is the emotional part of the brain has certain balance requirements that it's looking for, and it's different in every person. And so you will drive yourself crazy if you find a career path that is contrary to your preferred emotional state. You probably won't stay there very long. You won't be happy. You won't feel like you fit in because everybody else is happy in a state that you are not, and vice versa. So it's not that there's a wrong and a right, although I guess there could be some wrong things, but the most part is that these are just different, right? Some people tend more toward extrovert. Some people tend more towards quiet, and different things. Some people, their emotional state is triggered when they travel. Other people could just as soon stay home. Some people's emotional state is triggered at high rates of speed and they want to be on a roller coaster. Other people, they hate that, It triggers the opposite emotion in them. So it's just interesting to know that this emotional part of our brain is responsible probably for a lot more than we give it credit for. Because much of our thought process and decision making is because we can't stand imbalances internally. And so if we're feeling tired, worn out, your brain automatically says we have to balance that. What's something that will balance it? And then our brain starts going. So anyways, that is the impetus for many of our decisions. Okay. Now, one of the things that I want to talk about, one of the key emotions, is anger. So just calm down while I talk about this. So I'm going to talk about anger and how the brain processes and handles anger. One thing that they found is that your inner dialogue in the first moments after you have a stimulus that could encourage anger, right? Somebody cuts you off, somebody says something to you, somebody frustrates you at work. What they found is that your inner dialogue in response is really the key to how you handle the emotion. You really can't stop the initial surge of emotion, the reaction that you have. Somebody cuts you off, there's an initial reaction. I don't know if you guys have ever struggled with travel or with driving. I think most people have some experiences of being frustrated with other drivers. I read a book the other day, and the guy was talking about how all the people in the world that drive 5 miles an hour slower than you are idiots, and everyone in the world that drives 5 miles faster than you are maniacs. So you get in front of somebody and they're going slower than you, you're thinking, man, this guy can't drive. And then the person behind you that wants to go faster than you are, you're thinking, man, they're crazy. And so anyways, we all kind of have that experience at different times. But so if somebody cuts you off, there have been times when I've noticed my first reaction was, man, this guy, why? And I start saying things like, this guy could have hurt us, we could have just been in an accident, and it builds. But then there's been other times when I noticed when same kind of thing, somebody cuts me off, and for whatever reason, my first thing is, I bet they didn't even see me. And I'm talking to Liz, I'm like, man, I don't even think they saw me. And I've noticed a distinct difference in the lingering anger. If somebody cuts me off and I say, man, I bet they didn't even see me, we're off it in about 30 seconds. We're on to something else, not even thinking about it anymore. But if I defined it as, man, this guy's just careless, he doesn't care about other people, he's out, he could hurt somebody, and I take it personally, and I begin to talk up the anger, then it lingers. And this is what their research has found, is that your inner dialogue in the first few minutes after an event defines for your brain whether to remain angry or not, right? And so this is why it's very important for us that we may not be able to fully manage that initial reaction, but you do have the capacity to manage how long you stay angry about something, and it's often dependent on your inner dialogue the moment it happens. The faster, the better. Because if you let it fester for about 10 minutes and then start trying to talk yourself out of it, it doesn't work because it's already it's kind of saturated in you. Yep.
I think I was reading that today, that when you condition a different response from your normal, you build a new pathway between your emotion and your
Right.
and that changes your.
Right. Yeah, your brain has that capacity to rewire itself if you start thinking in different pathways. And in a similar vein, if you begin to develop the habit of proper inner dialogue, that it will become much more habitual, and you will be a much more peaceful person. At first, you are what you are right now, wherever you're at. If you do well with the inner dialogue, or if you take your emotion and run with it with the inner dialogue, however it is, you can't change yet. But what you start doing is, now that you have awareness, when something like that happens, you've got to find a way to speak down the emotional moment. And you say, you know what, I bet that person didn't see me. Or if it's a relationship, say, man, I bet they weren't trying to hurt me. Because people handle things totally different when you say, oh, I know they weren't trying to hurt me. It's the difference between if somebody that you're friends with said something maybe haphazardly, they didn't mean to hurt your feelings, and maybe they just kind of something slipped out, or they said it in a way that you kind of took it wrong or something. But it's somebody close to you, and they wouldn't try and hurt you, then your initial reaction is to defend them and say, oh, I know that's not what they meant. And then all of a sudden you're not upset. And you probably don't even notice it. You just go right on and say, oh, I know they didn't mean that. Or if it's your spouse or something, you know what I'm saying? And somebody says, oh, well, they said such and such. Your first initial reaction is, oh, I know what they meant. They didn't mean that. And you will tend to downplay it if you have a good relationship with them and they wouldn't say that. But then there's sometimes that people will say something, and then all of a sudden you're like, man, I can't believe they said that about me. And it begins to stir. And so your initial inner dialogue determines for your brain, physiologically, with your brain connections, whether this is something that needs to be maintained or whether this is something that can be eliminated, right, from your mental pathway. Yeah.
I think being angry takes so much energy. Physically.
Right.
Takes
It does.
energy.
It creates a lot of stress things. The physical thing of what's going on with anger is kind of interesting. This is your brain, right? Obviously, and there, we talked the neocortex and then the limbic system, right? And then you've got your amygdala. And your amygdala is responsible, for the release of hormones and things during emotional experiences. During anger, the initial response to the amygdala is twofold. It has an initial surge of hormones that it releases into the body that is a very quick surge. That's that high blood pressure, you get intense, you feel that initial surge. When somebody does something that aggravates you, there is often an initial surge of hormones. That's the tendency to get really upset in a moment, and then all of a sudden you're really focused. You're thinking, man, that really aggravated me, and you get focused. It's a surge of emotion right in the beginning. The second thing that it does is there is a process, a system of hormones that come from the adrenal cortisol system. Should be adrenal cortisol. And as you can tell from that, you get the words adrenal and cortisol. These two main hormones are released during triggering events, right? This initial surge of hormones is short-lived. This surge of hormones is not. It lasts for hours. So that's why you ever feel that feeling where initially you were really upset, and even if it's subsided a little bit, you still feel a little tense about it for a few hours. You're still thinking about it. You're running it over in your head, and it's done, but you haven't fully let it go yet, and you still feel that little bit of on edge. You're still feeling that emotion. That's because there's two different chemicals that are released. There's that initial one, and that initial one tends to be a surge. That's why sometimes people fly off the handle in the initial moment, because there is an initial surge of hormones that it's an intense surge designed for that fight or flight kind of thing that you may need a surge in about 2 minutes to be really active if you had to fight somebody. But then that goes away. But this adrenocortisol stays in your system for hours and sometimes a couple of days, which is why sometimes you're edgy for a couple of days after something if it's been a really big problem. And the reason that this is there is because this, when it's in your blood system, becomes an easy trigger to release the initial hormones again, right? And so, which is why, though, if you've been in something that's frustrated you, you are very likely to fly off the handle again if something else happens. Or you're edgy then, and you know, or sometimes you see it a lot of times in families. If somebody has a hard day at work, they come home, and if they don't handle it right, they will take it out on the people that they live with because they have high levels of this, and certain things that shouldn't have aggravated them do because their body is set up now to respond quickly with another surge of frustration because this adrenocortisol will stay in your body for a long time. And so that's why, I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where maybe you've been in an argument with somebody, then you've stepped away from it for a little bit, and then you start talking about it again, and you're right back in that state, and you're frustrated about it again because this had not had a chance to get out of your system yet. And so that's in there so that if, for a couple of hours, if you needed that fight or flight again, it's much faster. And so, but it you know, in just regular life, it makes it to where we have to be very careful about our inner dialogue, because our inner dialogue, if it's initially negative, will cause this to stay in our system much longer. Whereas if our inner dialogue is initially positive, our body starts to put the clamps on releasing this stuff. But if your initial dialogue is negative, that's the signal to your brain, oh, this is a negative thing, we need a lot of this. Which is why if your initial internal dialogue is negative, or you're talking up the frustration, you're building it, then you will have that linger with you because your brain is saying, oh, this is what we got to release. But if that inner dialogue is peaceful, you can somewhat cut this off at the pass, so to speak, and then you don't have to deal with that lingering hormone for the next few hours, and it makes it much easier for you to move on and get past it. Right?
Having someone tell you, oh, just don't worry about it.
Right.
Doesn't help.
Yeah, that just pushes it away. One thing, you familiar with the word catharsis? It means to vent it out, right? You'll see some people, particularly teenagers. When working with teenagers, I would get this a lot. They'll punch holes in walls, right? And their explanation is, oh, well, I'm mad. It helps me get it out, right? Well, what research has found is that punching the wall is no different than talking it up negatively. It tells your body, oh, you need a whole bunch of this. You know, when you start pumping yourself up to punch a wall and you start getting psyched up to hit the wall, your body starts releasing a whole bunch of those negative hormones, and it makes it worse. It may feel satisfying to punch a hole in something because anger is seductive, because it's sin, and it may feel like you're doing something good. But in terms of actually getting past the anger, punching the wall doesn't do anything. It just makes it linger. And so they found that catharsis doesn't really work. A couple other things that are interesting along these lines. So far what we've talked about are like trigger moments, right? Something that's really frustrating. Somebody cuts you off, somebody yells at you, somebody says something, something happens with a family member that they disappoint you, they did some behavior, your kids, stole the car or something, whatever. Then you have these explosive, minor stuff, you have these explosive moments. But that is not the only time that the amygdala will release these chemicals. It releases them often on a scale, so to speak, so that minor frustrations throughout the day tend to release small amounts of this into your system, right? And so this is why sometimes somebody that's been having a hard time at work, this begins to build. Because it may not have been any kind of an explosion. Maybe it's just a boss that's hard on them. and it begins to release this stuff, but it stays in your system for a while, and it begins to build up. Or if it's husband and wife arguing quite a bit, then they never quite escape it and get it fully out of their system, because even if it's not a knockdown, drag-out fight, the frustration of being in an argument will release this stuff. And what they found is that lower levels of this make it much easier to have a flare-up. That's what this is designed to do. It's to enable you to get right back into that aggressive mode if you need to. And so people that have stressful lives have quite a bit of this in their system. And what they found is that then when the next layer of this starts to come on, it adds to it, and it makes it even more and more stressful. And before you know it, someone who has cumulative small things in their life or frustrations in many different areas build up high levels of this, and then all of a sudden they are acting out of reactions that don't seem like them, right? Because they have high levels of this stuff that they normally would have brushed off. All of a sudden now they fly off the handle about it. We've probably all experienced someone in our life, or even done it ourselves, where because we were frustrated that day at work or something, and we had just had our limit of something, that when somebody does something, they got a more frustrated side from us. For example, maybe you had a really hard day at work and your kids are joking around. There's probably 9 times out of 10 they could joke around and you would laugh right along with them. But if you've had a really bad day, you might get frustrated with them and want them to leave you alone or something like that, and you respond in a way to something that you would have brushed off if you were feeling fresh. You may respond in a frustrated way, and the physical thing that's going on is these levels have built up and they've built up, and it is triggering fast responses from your frustration side, where when these levels are lower, things don't trigger it as fast. And so you have much more patience with people. And so this is why there is a physical reason why if somebody's having a bad day, they are much more likely to not take things in the right way. There are physical things going on. Was there a hand? Nowhere? Okay. And so the idea is, if you feel like you're having a stressful week, you've had a lot of things going on, and stress builds up over time. It's not necessarily any one thing. Sometimes it's stressful situations. Sometimes it's things with people going on around you that it begins to, your body carries a stress deficiency almost, like if sometimes, I read some research one time where large events in life, the stress level from that will stay with you sometimes 6 months up to a year. So if you've had a death in the family, that stress will affect your hormone levels for up to a year afterwards. And so you're not quite yourself. And then if you add in other life events that also trigger higher levels of things, then you begin to be snappy with people, be more easily frustrated, and you don't seem like yourself. And all the while, it's because your body is responding to the stress by releasing these hormones into your blood, and you have a hard time dealing with it. So if somebody's been through a few major life things in the last 6 to 8 months, their overall level of life enjoyment, of patience, of feelings of hope and that kind of stuff will all be much lower. And so one of the real keys is renewal type activities. Things where you just get away, you enjoy. You may not enjoy them as much because you're stressed out, but it puts you in a situation where your body can manage this level back down, right? So even if you go on a vacation when something really bad has happened, you may not enjoy the vacation because you're stressed out. But the vacation ideally puts you in a situation where you're not around any additional stress factors that will bump this back up and keep it in your system for a while. And you get in a renewal situation where you just step away from things for a while, and your body has a chance to manage this level back down so that you can begin to deal with life better. Because it builds on itself, and it will stay in your system for a while. And so a lot of times people get into high levels of this, and they can't get back out of it because they never get away long enough to give their body a chance to filter this back out of its system. And they stay frustrated and they stay tense.
You don't have a pill for it?
Well, I don't know. I don't know if that's true. I mean, maybe somebody does, but definitely that is a major reason why some people, and this leads to sickness, all kinds of other stuff. And so we've probably all seen or experienced even in our own life when we're frustrated. Sometimes we just instinctively know, I just need to step away from this for a minute, right? What is your body saying? Give me some time to clear this, right? Just step away. Give me enough time to clear this, and we can handle this differently, right? That's what's going on. You feel that surge. You feel these hormones in your body. And even if you're not saying, hey, I've got a hormone level that's high right now, I'm going to leave for a minute. You may not have ever defined it that way, but that's what your body's saying is, hey, you need to step away from this for a minute. And then you will calm down. Your body will filter this back out. So that's why that really does work. It's not just it's not just a habit that some people have. It is a physical thing to step away from an argument and give your body a chance to filter some of this stuff back out. Because if you and you need to do something peaceful. If you step away and you're brooding on it, when you come back into the house, you're ready to explode. You will explode more because you've thought all this stuff you want to say while you were gone. So when you step away, it's got to be genuinely trying to change the inner dialogue, right, to something that will counteract and signal to your body enough is enough with this. And it will help you to do that. And so sometimes if you have a stressful job, you can't just come home and unwind because it's physically in your bloodstream, And so people that have really stressful jobs end up with frustrating family lives sometimes because it stays in their system, and so they can never quite be the happy, peaceful, relaxed person that they could be because this stuff has the capacity to stay for days. And so you never get long enough periods away from your work situation to ever balance and manage this, right? And cortisol, affects stress levels, causes people to gain weight. That's why sometimes people that have really stressful jobs, sometimes their body starts getting unhealthy. And so all this stuff is something. So that's why taking actual renewal times, things that balance your emotional state, if it's reading the books, if it's going on trips, everybody has something that balances them. You have to be very careful to do that because as you're doing whatever it is that your body senses as this is my balancing activity, it sends signals to begin to let's get rid of this, right? And it helps you to have peace and relaxation. That's why sometimes you can go on vacation and you feel different after having gone on vacation. It's not just that the surrounding was different. You put yourself in a surrounding where you didn't experience stressful stimulators and your body didn't release any of this for a few days while you were on the break, and all of a sudden, look how different you feel. After just 2 or 3 days of being on a trip, you feel totally different because unless you had a stressful thing, you get to the hotel and they didn't book your room or something, or they sold your rental car somewhere, then all of a sudden it takes even longer. But typically on a trip, within a day or two, your body, you feel totally different. That's why people love vacation, is because it removes this out of their system, and then they can enjoy their week, right? So it just goes to show you how different day-to-day life would be if we could get rid of some of these type of things and begin to manage our inner dialogue in such a way that we don't add to the problem, right? And perpetuate having this in our system by having self-talk that says, man, I really should be mad at that. Can you believe what they did to me? And before long, you talk yourself into being more mad than you were at the beginning. And you're destroying yourself, which is why forgiveness is such a key thing in the Bible. Because you can't really remove this until you forgive, right? And that forgiveness is important for the other person, but it's really important for you. not just in its primarily in its spiritual dimension, it's important. But then there are also physiological things that happen when you have forgiveness and when you have that internal dialogue that is genuine forgiveness. Then these levels come back down. What time is it? Probably about time to go. Okay. Let me see here. Anything else that was important? Let me give you one story of some research. This was actual research. They did an experiment. They did two of these. One of them, they had a person that was rude to different people that they were doing the experiment with. He was rude to them through different things that they'd set up, and then he would leave, and then they would have the person watch a movie, and then later someone would come in and interview them and say, hey, this person that was helping you earlier, we're thinking about giving them a job promotion. What do you think about them? But that person was intentionally rude to them in the beginning. But there were two different movies that they showed. One was a peaceful, nice, happy, funny family movie. The other one was an action, tense, angry movie, right? And they said, without exception, people's responses were based more by the movie they saw in between than it was on their experience with the person. And then the people that saw the peaceful movie were much more likely to be in a mood now where they're saying, oh, yeah, let's just give him a break. I think you should. He'll be okay. Whereas the people who had just gotten out of the tense movie had no mercy at all. And so it's interesting how your reactions to people are often conditioned by the emotional state that your body is in. And then the other research, very similar, they did something where the guy was rude to people, and then one of the other employees came in, and he was rude to her, and on the way out, she said to half the group, she took it kind of as personal, right? But then on the way out, with the other half, when he said something rude, she took it with a smile. And then when the door closed, she turned to the group and said, oh, you have to forgive him. He's gone through some really serious personal losses over the last few weeks, and he's just not himself. And then they asked them the question about should they promote them. And every person that heard that he had personal things that he had lost that he was dealing with gave him grace and said, yeah, let's overlook it. I think we should give him the promotion. Which leads to the principle that if we have understanding, we are much more likely to have grace and mercy. And that when we really understand someone, we are much more likely to extend to them the same grace that we would want. And most of the time, the reasons that we're so upset come back to we're not really putting ourselves in the other person's shoes.
I guess different translations say it different, but Solomon, what he asked for was an understanding heart towards God.
Right. To be able to sit where they sit. Ezekiel says that before he started his ministry, that first encounter he had with God, the first thing he did was he went to the brook Chebar and he sat where they sat for 7 days and just sat with the people of God and watched their struggle. Anybody ever seen Ender's Game? I think I talked about that last week too, but it was a really good movie. But in Ender's Game, the idea is that these aliens are attacking the planet, and so what they come up with is because now everyone fights with androids instead of putting somebody actually in the plane. It's all computer-based, from a base, so that nobody's actually dying in the plane crash. And so they found that kids have a much greater capacity to learn video game skills, and so they found that if they're going to have these planes being flown in the battle, that training young teenagers was actually a better method because their brain is wired at that age to be able to pick it up very quickly. So anyways, but in the story itself, kind of the underlying philosophical theme is that somebody tells the kid, he says, the moment that you know your enemy good enough to defeat him is the moment you begin to love him and won't want to fight him. And so the idea is that that if you knew your enemy, to learn his ways inside and out so that you could defeat him, creates such an understanding about him that now you love him because you understand why he is the way that he is, and you don't want to fight anyway. And so that was that was like the quote that stuck with me from the movie, is that if you really understood the other person, it would probably change from anger to love, because we're all fallen, and so understanding is a key to being able to deal and to have the proper self-talk. That if you have genuine understanding, then you can speak to things internally in such a way that it doesn't trigger these things in yourself, and it creates the atmosphere of love that we're required to have, to love your enemy as yourself, the Bible says. Okay. Any other questions, thoughts, bribes? All right, let's pray. Lord, thank you for today and for these classes. I pray that you will help us to be able to apply these things now that we have increased understanding of our own physical processes. I pray that that would result in greater understanding and greater self-management of our own emotional intelligence, that these things don't catch us unaware, but we are prepared for the changes that our body will experience. And Lord, I pray you help us to manage these things in godly ways. In Jesus' name, amen. Yes.